Test one, two, three, three, two, one. Welcome to another episode of We Don't Miss, a YouTube channel where I talk about everything and anything relating to mental health, positive mindset, fitness, nutrition, and just being the best version of yourself. I'm trying to bring all goodness, not hating on anybody, not hating on anything, and just talking about some topics that I think a lot of you guys are going to resonate with. So today's topic is going to be about failure. And before you go to another video, because you're like, oh, it's just another failure video, it's not about failure or what to do when you fail and how to succeed and all that. It's a more in-depth look about how I don't think we're even talking about failure anymore. Why are we not talking about failure anymore? I think maybe it stems from the fact that social media has everybody on their heels about their own life because they're comparing it to Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, etc. And we all know that while that is real because people are making a business off of it, that a lot of the stuff you see is only the highlights. I love that. That's my favorite kind of quote, to put it nicely. It's like, that's the highlights of people's lives. And there's maybe some people out there, I don't follow them, but maybe there are people making a channel off failure and bad things that have happened to them, but that doesn't really sell, right? Because we want to hear success stories. And so, why are we not talking about failure? I think it's because people are scared. I think it's because people are scared that everybody else around them appears to be very put together and that they're either succeeding in one shape or form or fashion. And if they're not succeeding, at the minimum, they're not talking about the adversity that they're facing. And let me tell you guys and girls, everybody is facing adversity. You know, they say there's only a couple things true in life: death and taxes. Adversity should be added to that list because everybody's going through it. And that's what is weird to me, is the fact that everybody's going through it. And I feel like maybe 30 years ago, 20 years ago, before social media, talking about successes and failures was more accessible because people were actually had to physically talk to each other, whether it be at like a family barbecue or a party or at the bar or whatever. There was none of this shorthand, hey, how you doing? I'm doing great. Okay, cool. Thumbs up, LOL, blah blah blah. You know, before the internet, you actually had to talk to somebody face to face at an event, and those events are not like, nobody plans a 5-minute party. They're like an hour or two. And so you kind of run out of stuff to talk about if all you're talking about in the first 5 or 10 minutes is, oh, what do you do for work? Are you married? Do you have kids? And it's like you get done with all those pleasantries really, really fast. And then you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs, or now we're twiddling our thumbs because we're not really that good at socializing. But I think back in the day, people were getting a little bit more, and I don't want to say intrusive, because that's kind of from a negative connotation, but I think people are willing to get a little more personal, like, hey, what do you do for work? How is that going? Where do you see yourself in the next couple of years? What are the struggles are you facing? How is your boss? Do you have to study to succeed? What's the next rung you got to climb on the ladder? And it gave people time to like actually talk slash vent to somebody else that you know or don't know. And then whenever you say stuff out loud, that gives perspective on your life. I mean, how many times have you been had a problem that you've been facing, and you start talking about it out loud, and just talking about it out loud, you get to the conclusion. And so I think a lot of us right now are in our head because we're scared of adversity and we're scared of failure. And so we talk it out in our head and then we think we have the answer, but then life smacks us in the face because what's going on in your head isn't what really plays out in the real world. So, referencing my handy dandy notes here, mental health. So, talking about failure and mental health, I think that failure and mental health go hand in hand in a positive manner. I think on the surface, people that talk about mental health would be like, oh, well, let's not talk about failure because we don't want to re traumatize somebody because of something that happened. And I'm not a trauma expert or psychologist. I'm not even getting into that. I'm talking about general failures, and those failures being like, you didn't make the cut for the sports team, or you didn't get the audition that you wanted, or you didn't get the promotion, you didn't get the raise, you got fired from your job. Those general types of failures. And how is that good for mental health? And here's the reason why. Because if we don't address that failure is a 100% certainty, which it is, then you can't prepare yourself when it actually happens. And so, what I think right now is happening with all this, the mental health, depression, anxiety epidemic that we're seeing, is people are unwilling to step outside of the box and take risks because they see failure as failure. They don't see failure for what it actually is, which is knowledge. Failing means that you get the opportunity of a lifetime to figure out why you failed. And so that's step one. Step one is understanding that failure is not a bad thing. Failure is another wide open door to walk through to ask yourself, why did I fail in this instance? Because there's definitely a reason for failure. There's very few instances, and I'm not going to even take time to try and think of or process a time where everything was right and the stars aligned and then there was failure, because I think they're so few and far between. But I think what actually happens in failure is if people actually have the intestinal fortitude and the backbone and the courage to look into that failure, which is hard on your first failure because those three things that I just mentioned occur after multiple failures, those get stronger. But when you have a failure, you have to do a couple things that fall under the assessment umbrella. And the assessment is not what did everybody else around me do wrong? Why did this happen to me? It's because the world is against me. No. When you assess a failure, you assess from a personal point of view and ask, was I prepared? Did I plan well enough? Do I have the knowledge to succeed? In the military, we have a phrase, they call it the 6 P's or 7 P's, depending on who you talk to. Prior preparation and planning prevents piss poor performance. And I don't think a lot of people are taking accountability, which is another thing that you learn through failures, is the big A word, as we call it, accountability. Where did I fail here? Like, let's take all the external factors out, because I think you can rarely say in failure, you can rarely say, I did everything right and we still failed. I just don't think that's the case. I think when you take accountability, you start asking questions. Was I prepared well enough? Did I communicate well enough with the people around me? Did I put them in a position to set themselves up for success? Did I put myself in a position to set myself up for success? Did I do everything that I possibly could? And if you answer that question of, yes, I did everything I possibly could, that's probably a bigger problem than failure in itself, because that means your ego is probably getting in the way, because there's no way that you can be as knowledgeable on a certain topic as you could be ever. It's just not possible. There's always somebody out there smarter than you. There's always new information coming out. There's new, to throw out another military term, there's always new tactics, techniques, and procedures that come out that you can get fresh on. Or you can actually get innovative, and instead of looking at the old stuff saying maybe I failed because there's a new way, because the external dynamics have changed so much, we got to come up with something new to be successful. So closing that part out is taking ownership of your own failure is one of the reasons why I'm worried we're not talking about failure a lot anymore. Because if we're not talking about it, we're not addressing that it is an inevitability. And so we're shielding / safeguarding children or young adults to believe that they're in an environment where the world is not going to kick them in the balls multiple times over and over again. And if you're not prepared for that adversity, you are put in the category of what's called soft. And I'm not trying to be too hard, but I'm saying that you will not be prepared for that adversity, and you're going to crumble. You're just going to fold like a deck of cards. So what comes out of failure if we do address the failure and we finally cross that bridge and understand that failure is an inevitability, what are some of the things that you gain? Hundreds of things, but just off the top of my head, resilience. You gain resilience by knowing that failure is not a one-time thing. It's a multiple time thing. And failure is conversely related to the amount of pressure that you put on yourself and the pressure of the situation. So the more that you push, the more struggle you will have, which therefore makes you need to have more resilience to get through those situations. So it's a loop, it's a cycle. It's not like you just have, oh, I just had this one problem that I need to get through. I learned how to be resilient. I was successful. I didn't fail. Now everything's fine. No, if you get to that point, then that point means you've stopped trying. You are now stagnant. So you need to repeat the loop of pressing and pushing harder and going to the extremes and of places that you've never been before and expanding your knowledge and trying new things, which will once again result in failure, which is why it makes it inevitable. So you have to understand that the cycle constantly goes on. And only when you have that understanding that the cycle is never ending, then you can finally sit back in the failure and realize that it isn't failure. That failure doesn't exist. It is only growth. It is only growth and knowledge. You get determination. You get understanding. You get self-reliance. And you learn how to better prepare. I touched on this earlier, but I want to touch on it one more time because this is me now talking to myself, because in all the videos I've told you, when I say you, I mean me. I have had failures where when I'm sulking 24, 48 hours after the failure, I'm like, well, they could have done this better. The situation could have been set up better. I didn't get the best training, or this or that, or blah, blah, blah. And the fingers are always pointing this way, but they should be pointing this way. Because if that's really the truth, that your training wasn't good enough, you should have spoke up before the main event and said, hey, I don't think I'm prepared. Can you teach me more? If you think that the people around you didn't set you up for success in the beginning stages, you didn't communicate to the other people saying, hey, I don't really feel too good going into this, whatever it is you're going into, whether it's like a sports game or the final business pitch, to close some kind of acquisition or something like that, and it doesn't go well. It's like, did you communicate that earlier, that you didn't think you were prepared? So that preparation is absolutely key for going into the next event, to try and get to the place, which I've already said you can never fully get there, but you can be like 99.9%, is to say, hey, if I come out of this and it doesn't work, I can say I did everything that I did, or I did everything I could. But I think that the reality is, and even with me and the failures that I've had, which have been multiple, is that when the dust all settled at the end, I was like, you know what? I wasn't as prepared as I should have been. Or I look back on the weeks or months leading up to that failure, and it's like, I should have done this here. I should have done that there. I should have asked for help here. I should have gotten mentorship here. I should have reached out there. And I didn't. And that's a good loop to be in. That is a good feedback loop to be in, because now you're learning. But if you're in the feedback loop of they, them, this, the other, and everybody else, that is never going to get you anywhere. So, what happens if we don't talk about failure? If we don't talk about failure, which I think is happening right now with the younger generation, and once again, relating it to mental health, I think that you're going to get a couple things. Victimization. When things don't go your way, because we live in a world now where everything is, hey, you're doing fine. Everybody gets a trophy. All you got to do is put in a little more effort. Like, it's all these positive pep talks, and nobody is really sitting people down and just being honest and saying, and when I say this, I'm not saying in a negative way. This all comes down to good, positive leadership and mentorship. Sitting down with somebody and being honest, including you yourself, sitting down and saying, I'm not cutting it. Why? And if you're lucky, you have a leader or mentor that says, you're not cutting it because da 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 da. Well, now you have a roadmap, you have breadcrumbs, and you can follow those, and that's awesome. That's what great leaders and mentors do. But it kind of starts with you. It's like, why was I not successful? And I think right now people aren't even asking why. They're just going and doing the blame game. And so it leads to victimization, which leads to more stress, less self-esteem, less confidence, and then leads down the path of loneliness, depression, anxiety, less self-reliance, and not knowing oneself, which is scary. What else happens? No self-confidence. If you don't understand that failure is going to be a constant in your life, every time you're slapped in the face with it, if you crumble and you don't look at yourself and look at the people around you that are willing to support you, which, oh, by the way, like, most people have a whole entourage of people that are willing to support them. But then when they hit the failure wall, they kind of like pull back, and they're like, I can do this on my own. I don't need to tell anybody else, which goes right back to the conversation about not talking about failure. It's like, no, like, lean on people. People want to support you and people want to help. I've found that in the times that I've struggled most, when I finally got off my ass and was like, I need help, and I contacted people, they were like over the moon willing to help and happy to help. And then I realized, well, this isn't that crazy, because I consider myself a helper. And I stop everything when somebody calls me that I care about, and they're like, hey man, I'm really struggling. Can you help? I'm like, whoa, hold the phone. Like, yes, like, what's going on? What do I need to do? And most people are like that as well. So don't be so scared to reach out to family and friends and tell them that you're struggling. Like, that's part of the process, and hearing what they have to say. And, I call, like, my big bro is like, he's mentor number one for me. And almost every time I have a problem, even now, because I've learned about adversity, even pre-problem, I call him and I'm like, hey, I see this coming down the pipe. What do you think I should do? And he's like, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. And I'm just so happy and fortunate to have him in my life, because he's a very successful individual and very driven, and he always gives me the right advice. And there's people in your life like that too. And if there aren't people like that in your life that are blood related, you need to get outside of your circle and find people. They're out there. To say that they're not out there is false. They are out there. If you aren't finding them, you're looking in the wrong place. I want to close with this. Before I made this video, I watched a YouTube video of Kobe Bryant, and somebody was interviewing him asking, where do you lie on the spectrum of an athlete? Because the question was posed, there's two types of athletes. There's athletes that win, or there's athletes that only play to win, and then there's athletes that only play not to fail. And he answered the question by saying that he was none of those. He was somewhere in the middle. And to paraphrase, he described that if all you do is play not to fail, then you're going to be worried all the time about what does failure look like, and you're not going to be on your A game. You're not going to be in the zone. And if you play only to succeed, you're asking the same question. Well, if I don't succeed, what is failure going to look like? And then you're not going to be in real time playing the game, in his case, basketball. But I found that very analogous to the game of life. If you are only looking at whatever it is you're trying to achieve and saying, well, what happens if it doesn't work out? Or you're already very successful and you're plotting your next goal and you're like, well, I'm already successful. What if I don't succeed here? Or what if I continue to succeed? You're not present in the moment. So the reality is, and from watching so many videos and listening to so many podcasts of people that are already successful, they will all tell you the same thing. The reality of the achievement doesn't lie in the beginning or the end state. It lies in the middle state, which is the longest part of any process, which is the struggle, which is the failure, which is the ups and downs, which is all the emotion. It's the lack of sleep. It's the questions about your finance. It's the question about, is this the right thing? All that stuff is the reality, and that is living. Rich people say that they wish they could go back through the process and the struggle of the creation of what made them rich, because that was the most fulfilling point of their life. So remember that. Remember that when we're talking to children, when we're talking to young adults, when you're talking to yourself, and if you're getting down on yourself, which I have done multiple times, and I'm just trying to get better at it like most of you are. When something happens to you that is not to your liking at that moment and that day, take a moment to pause and take a breath and say, this is the meat and potatoes. This is the realest of the real. The struggle is the success. And if I don't learn from this, all I'm going to learn to do is fix my prior mistakes and become more successful. And once you get into that positive feedback loop, that's when you're going to crush it. Thanks for listening. See you on the next one.